Imagine waking up one day and discovering that your life is no longer under your control. A heavy, invisible gavel looms over you, ready to strike, and yet you don't even know why. For many of us, this might sound like a nightmare, but for Franz Kafka, this was the essence of the human condition. His novel, The Trial, paints a haunting picture of an absurd life where meaning slips through the cracks of bureaucracy and control. But why does life feel like a joke? Why do we often feel trapped in systems we barely understand? Today, we will explore Kafka's masterpiece, The Trial, through the lens of absurdism, a philosophy that challenges us to confront life's chaos with resilience. Alongside Kafka's insights, we'll weave in lessons from Buddhist teachings, which offer profound tools to navigate life's challenges, even when they seem utterly nonsensical. Let's dive into the story of Joseph K., a man whose fate feels eerily similar to our own. From the absurdities of modern life to the oppressive weight of societal expectations, Kafka's world mirrors our struggles. By the end of this journey, you'll see not only the absurdity of existence, but also how to rise above it. Have you ever felt like life was playing a cruel joke on you? Maybe it's when you're stuck in an endless loop of work, bills, and obligations, and no matter what you do, it feels like you're going nowhere. That's exactly the kind of world Franz Kafka thrusts us into with his novel, The Trial. Picture this. It's your 30th birthday, and instead of waking up to cake and balloons, you open your eyes to two strangers in your room. They're not there to celebrate, they're there to arrest you. But here's the kicker. They won't tell you what crime you've committed, or even who's accusing you. They just say, "You're under arrest," and then leave, telling you to go about your day as usual. Sounds bizarre, right? Welcome to Kafka's world. Now, let's be honest. If this happened to you, how would you react? Would you laugh it off as a prank? Panic? Try to fight back? That's exactly what Joseph K., the protagonist of The Trial, grapples with. At first, he thinks it's all a misunderstanding, maybe even a sick joke. But as the days go on, the weight of his situation starts to sink in. He's caught in a nightmare, a labyrinth of courts, faceless officials, and endless rules that don't make any sense. Living in a Kafkaesque world. What makes The Trial so haunting is how much it mirrors our own lives. Think about it. Have you ever been stuck dealing with a bureaucracy that just doesn't care? Maybe it was a government office where the paperwork seemed designed to confuse you. Or perhaps it was a corporate system where you felt like just another cog in the machine. That's Kafkaesque. Feeling powerless, confused, and trapped in a system too big to fight. Joseph K.'s journey is the ultimate expression of this. He tries to navigate his trial, but every step he takes only makes things worse. He's shuffled from one court to another, meeting officials who seem like they should have answers but don't. The deeper he goes, the less sense it all makes. Sound familiar? It's the same frustration we feel when life throws us curveballs we can't make sense of. Losing a job out of nowhere, dealing with a health scare, or facing an unexpected crisis. Absurdism, embracing the chaos. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Why does this story resonate so deeply? Because it taps into something Albert Camus, the philosopher of absurdism, talked about. The clash between our desire for meaning and life's utter randomness. We want life to make sense. We crave answers, order, and fairness. But life doesn't always deliver. Camus used the story of Sisyphus to explain this. You know, the guy in Greek mythology who was cursed to roll a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down every time. Sounds depressing, right? But Camus flipped the script. He said, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because Sisyphus doesn't give up. He finds meaning in the struggle itself, not in the outcome. And that's the same mindset Joseph K. could have used. Instead of obsessing over the trial and what it meant, he could have shrugged and said, "Well, this is ridiculous, but I'll make the best of it." Imagine if he'd laughed at the absurdity of it all, focused on the parts of his life he could control, and just kept moving forward. Buddhism's perspective on absurdity. Now, here's where Buddhism comes in, offering a fresh perspective. The Buddha taught that suffering often comes from clinging to control, to certainty, to outcomes. Sound familiar? Joseph K. clung to the idea that he could figure out his trial, that there had to be a reason for it all. But Buddhism teaches us to let go of that need for control. There's a term in Buddhism called anicca, which means impermanence. It's the idea that nothing lasts forever, not our problems, not our joys, not even our trials. If Joseph K. had embraced this mindset, he might have seen his trial as just another impermanent thing. Frustrating, sure, but not worth losing himself over. Let's bring this closer to home. Have you ever had one of those days where everything goes wrong? Your car won't start, your boss yells at you for something you didn't do, and then you come home to find an unexpected bill in the mail. In those moments, life feels like a Kafka novel. Random, unfair, and maddening. But what if we approached those moments with a sense of humor and resilience? What if we said, "Well, this is absurd, but I'll roll with it"? That's the power of combining Camus's philosophy with Buddhist teachings. It's not about denying the chaos, it's about embracing it and finding peace within it. Joseph K.'s story is a cautionary tale, but it's also a call to action. It challenges us to ask, how do we handle the absurdities in our lives? Do we let them consume us, or do we rise above them? Kafka might not have given Joseph K. a happy ending, but we have the power to write our own. Let's take a moment to talk about one of the most chilling aspects of the trial, the idea of being watched. Imagine you're Joseph K. You've just been arrested, but nobody tells you why. Now, everywhere you go, you feel like someone is looking at you. It's not just the court officials. It's your neighbors, your coworkers, even your friends. They don't need to say anything. Their stares are enough to make you feel judged, guilty, and utterly powerless. This concept, what we call the gaze, is one of the most haunting parts of Kafka's story. It's not just about being seen, it's about being reduced to what other people think of you. And if we're honest, we've all felt it. Maybe it was that time you made a mistake at work and felt like everyone was whispering about you. Or maybe it's the pressure of living up to your family's expectations. That constant feeling of being observed can be suffocating, can't it? Let's dive into what's really happening here. When Joseph K. is arrested, he's no longer just a regular guy. Suddenly, he becomes the accused. And even though no one knows what he's accused of, not even him, it doesn't matter. The label sticks. His landlady starts looking at him differently. His co-workers act distant. And even his own family begins to pull away. It's this invisible judgment that starts to change him. At first, Joseph K. is confident. He tells himself, "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong." But as the stares and whispers build, so does his self-doubt. He starts to wonder, what if they're right? What if I did something wrong and I don't even know it? Sound familiar? It's the same feeling we get when we're criticized or judged. Even if we know deep down that we're in the right, the weight of other people's opinions can be crushing. It's like carrying an invisible burden everywhere you go. here's where things get interesting. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre had this famous quote, "Hell is other people." Now, that might sound harsh, but he didn't mean it literally. What Sartre was talking about is how other people's perceptions can trap us. It's like being under a spotlight 24/7. You're not free to just be yourself because you're always worried about how others see you. Joseph K. lives this reality every day after his arrest. He starts acting differently, not because he wants to, but because he feels like he has to. He avoids people, becomes defensive, and even starts questioning his own identity. The gaze of others transforms him from a confident man into someone consumed by guilt and shame. Now, let's bring in a bit of Buddhist wisdom to help us navigate this mess. Buddhism teaches us that one of the main sources of suffering is upadana, attachment. And one of the biggest attachments we have, the need for validation from others. We crave approval. We want to be seen as successful, kind, smart, or whatever else we value. But when we base our self-worth on other people's opinions, we hand over control of our happiness. The Buddha had a simple yet powerful solution. Let go. Let go of the need to be liked. Let go of the fear of being judged. Focus on your own actions, not on how others perceive them. There's a saying in Buddhism, your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own unguarded thoughts. In other words, it's not what others think of you that matters. It's what you think of yourself. Imagine if Joseph K. had embraced this mindset. Instead of obsessing over what others thought, he could have focused on what he knew to be true, that he hadn't done anything wrong. By detaching from the gaze of others, he could have reclaimed his power. Let's talk about a real-world example to bring this idea home. Take Malala Yousafzai, for instance. After being attacked for advocating for girls' education, she could have let the judgment and criticism from her attackers define her. Instead, she stood tall, knowing that her mission was more important than their opinions. Her story reminds us that when we let go of external judgment, we unlock incredible strength. Another example, think about social media. Have you ever posted something and then checked your phone a dozen times to see how many likes it got? We've all been there. It's the digital version of the gaze, and it can be just as toxic. But what if we stopped caring so much about the likes and started focusing on whether what we share aligns with our values? That shift can be liberating. Here's the twist. The gaze isn't all bad. When we stop seeing it as something to fear, it can actually become a tool for self-reflection. Buddhism teaches us to use challenges as opportunities for growth. So instead of letting judgment paralyze us, we can ask, what can I learn from this? For Joseph K., the gaze could have been a wake-up call. It could have been a chance to step back, reflect, and ask, why am I letting this system control me? What can I do to take back my agency? Unfortunately, he never reaches that point, but we can. So, what's the takeaway here? The gaze of authority, the judgment of others, can feel overwhelming, but it only has as much power as we give it. When we let go of the need for validation and focus on living authentically, we break free from its grip. Joseph K.'s story is a cautionary tale, but it's also a reminder of our resilience. No matter how oppressive the gaze may feel, we always have the power to rise above it. And when we do, we discover a freedom that no system, no judgment, and no gaze can ever take away. Let's talk about something that's all too familiar in our lives: power. No, not the superhero kind, though that would be fun to discuss, but the kind of power that runs our systems, bureaucracies, governments, corporations. these invisible forces that shape our everyday lives. In the trial, Kafka gives us a front row seat to what happens when these systems take over. And trust me, it's as chilling as it is relatable. Imagine this. You're Joseph K., a hardworking, intelligent guy, confident in your place in the world. Then suddenly, you're thrown into a system that doesn't care who you are. You're arrested, but no one tells you why. You're summoned to court, but the court is in a random attic in a poor neighborhood. You try to fight back, but every move you make seems to dig you deeper into the system's grip. That's the thing about Kafka's portrayal of power. It's not loud or flashy. It's subtle, almost invisible, but it's everywhere. The court officials in the trial aren't villains twirling their mustaches. They're ordinary people doing their jobs, following rules they don't fully understand. And yet, their actions strip Joseph K. of his autonomy, one small step at a time. Does that sound familiar? Think about the last time you dealt with a giant system. Maybe it was applying for a loan, navigating healthcare, or just trying to get your driver's license renewed. It's not that anyone in the system was out to get you. It's that the system itself was so big, so impersonal, that it felt impossible to fight. That's the kind of power Kafka was warning us about. Now, let's dig a little deeper into how this power works. In the trial, the court is this massive, faceless entity. It never explains itself, never gives Joseph K. a clear answer. And that's exactly how it keeps its power. The less you know, the more helpless you feel. This is what psychologists call learned helplessness. When people are stuck in situations where their actions don't seem to make a difference, they eventually stop trying. That's what happens to Joseph K. The more he fights, the more futile it feels, until he starts to believe there's no way out. But here's the kicker. The people enforcing the system, those court officials, clerks, and warders, they're not free either. They're just as trapped as Joseph K. They follow the rules because they've been conditioned to believe they have no choice. It's a cycle of power that feeds on itself, and everyone in the system becomes a cog in the machine. This is where Buddhism offers a refreshing perspective. In Buddhist teachings, power rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion is considered a source of suffering. Systems like the one in the trial thrive on delusion, the idea that following rules blindly is the right thing to do, even when it harms others. But Buddhism teaches us something revolutionary. True power comes from awareness. When we see through the illusions of these systems, we start to take back control. The Buddha often spoke about right view, the ability to see things as they really are. Imagine if Joseph K. had stepped back and said, "Wait a minute. This system isn't as all-powerful as it seems. It's just a bunch of confused people playing by rules no one understands." By recognizing the illusion of power, we can begin to dismantle it, not by fighting it head-on, but by refusing to give it authority over our lives. Let's bring this into the real world. Think about whistleblowers like Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning. They exposed the hidden workings of powerful systems, risking their own freedom to show the world what was really going on. Their stories remind us that no system is invincible. The moment we shine a light on its flaws, its power starts to crumble. Or consider the civil rights movements around the world. From Gandhi's fight against British colonialism to Martin Luther King Jr.'s struggle for racial equality, these leaders didn't take on systems of power with violence. They used truth, awareness, and collective action to show the world that those systems were built on injustice. And in doing so, they inspired change. here's the uncomfortable truth. Systems like the one in the trial don't just rely on their rules. They rely on our compliance. Think about how often we go along with things because that's just the way it is. We pay hidden fees, accept unfair policies, or follow orders we don't agree with because it feels easier than pushing back. In the trial, Joseph K. becomes complicit in his own downfall. He doesn't question the court's authority as much as he could. He doesn't rally others to his side. Instead, he internalizes the system's judgment, letting it define his reality. But here's the thing. We don't have to make the same mistake. So, how do we break free from the power of these systems? It starts with awareness. Buddhist teachings remind us to look deeply at the nature of our reality. When we see that systems are just collections of people and rules, not unstoppable forces, we can start to reclaim our agency. Second, we need courage. It takes bravery to stand up to power, especially when it feels overwhelming. But, as history has shown us, even small acts of defiance can lead to big changes. The Buddha taught that every action, no matter how small, creates ripples. By choosing compassion, truth, and fairness, we become part of a larger movement toward justice. Kafka's The Trial is a chilling reminder of what happens when we let systems of power go unchecked. But it's also a call to action. It challenges us to see through the illusions of authority and reclaim our freedom. Yes, power can be intimidating, but it's not invincible. By combining awareness, courage, and compassion, we can navigate even the most Kafkaesque situations. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, we can rewrite the story. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone trapped in the same system. Let's talk about alienation. The kind of loneliness that doesn't just come from being alone, but from feeling disconnected from the world around you. It's the loneliness you feel in a crowded room. The isolation that sneaks in even when you're surrounded by people. In the trial, Kafka shows us what it's like to experience that on a whole new level. And honestly, it hits close to home for many of us. From the moment Joseph K. is arrested, his world starts to shrink. His neighbors begin to look at him differently, even though they don't know what he's accused of. His friends and co-workers start pulling away. And slowly, Joseph himself starts to retreat. He talks to his family less, avoids social interactions, and isolates himself emotionally. Why does this happen? It's not just about the trial or the system. It's about shame. Joseph feels the invisible weight of judgment everywhere he goes. And here's the sad part. Even though no one really knows the truth about his situation, their silence and stares speak volumes. They don't need to say anything. Joseph fills in the blanks with his own fears and insecurities. Have you ever felt something similar? Maybe it was after a big mistake, or even just the fear that people were judging you. That feeling of alienation? It's not just in your head. It's a universal experience, and Kafka captures it perfectly. Let's break this down. Alienation often starts with what French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called the gaze. It's the idea that when someone looks at you, they're not just observing you, they're defining you. And in that moment, you stop being yourself. You become what they see, guilty, awkward, unworthy, or whatever label they've silently assigned to you. In the trial, this gaze becomes unbearable for Joseph K. It's not just the court officials watching him, it's everyone. His landlady avoids eye contact, his co-workers whisper behind his back, and even his family seems embarrassed by him. The more he feels judged, the more he starts to doubt himself. He begins to see himself through their eyes, losing touch with who he really is. Now, here's where Buddhism offers a different perspective. In Buddhism, the idea of anatta, or non-self, teaches us that who we are isn't fixed. We're not the labels people give us. We're not even the roles we play in life, like employee, friend, or parent. At our core, we're something much deeper, something unshakable. This is why meditation and mindfulness are so powerful. They help us reconnect with that deeper self, the part of us that isn't defined by the opinions of others. Imagine if Joseph K. had taken a step back and said, "You know what? I'm not just the accused. I'm more than this trial. I'm more than their judgment." That shift in perspective could have changed everything for him. Shame is one of the most isolating emotions we can feel. It tells us we're not enough, that we're unworthy of connection. And in Joseph K.'s case, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He pulls away from the people who care about him, not because they've abandoned him, but because he believes they will. This is something we see in real life all the time. Think about someone who's lost their job. Even if their friends and family are supportive, they might start to withdraw out of shame. They avoid social events, stop answering calls, and convince themselves that others are judging them, even if that's not true. Brené Brown, a researcher who studies shame, puts it perfectly. Shame thrives in secrecy. The more we hide, the stronger it grows. But when we share our experiences with others, when we open up, shame starts to lose its grip. Let me tell you a story about a man named Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, enduring unimaginable suffering in concentration camps. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl talks about how even in the darkest moments, we can find purpose and connection. Frankl observed that the people who survived weren't always the strongest physically. They were the ones who maintained a sense of purpose. They reached out to others, found small ways to connect, and refused to let the system strip them of their humanity. Frankl's story reminds us that even in the face of alienation, we can choose connection. Another example, Malala Yousafzai. After being attacked for standing up for girls' education, she could have chosen isolation. But instead, she chose to connect with the world on a larger scale, becoming a global advocate for education and human rights. Her resilience reminds us that alienation doesn't have to define us. Buddhism teaches that alienation is, in many ways, an illusion. The idea of being separate from others is a trick of the mind. In reality, we're all deeply connected. This is the principle of interbeing, the understanding that our lives are intertwined in countless ways. One practice that embodies this idea is loving kindness meditation, metta bhavana. In this meditation, you focus on sending goodwill to yourself, your loved ones, and even people you don't get along with. By cultivating compassion for others, you start to feel that connection again. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how isolated we feel, we're never truly alone. So, how do we overcome alienation? First, we need to challenge the stories we tell ourselves. When Joseph K. felt judged, he assumed the worst about what others thought. But often, those judgments exist only in our heads. By questioning those thoughts, we can start to break free from them. Second, we need to reach out. Isolation feeds on silence, but connection thrives on vulnerability. Whether it's talking to a friend, joining a community, or simply smiling at a stranger, small acts of connection can make a big difference. Finally, we need to reconnect with ourselves. Practices like meditation, journaling, or spending time in nature help us remember who we are beyond the labels. They ground us, reminding us that we're more than what the world sees. Joseph K's story is a powerful warning about what happens when we let alienation take over. But it's also a reminder that we have the power to choose differently. By challenging shame, reaching out, and reconnecting with our true selves, we can break free from the grip of alienation. So, the next time you feel disconnected, remember this: you are not alone. You are not defined by others' judgments. And no matter how far you've drifted, there's always a path back to connection. Let's face it, life can be downright absurd sometimes. You work hard, follow the rules, and yet things don't always go your way. It feels like the universe is playing a cruel joke on you, doesn't it? Franz Kafka's The Trial captures this perfectly. It's a story that doesn't tie everything up in a neat bow. Instead, it leaves us with a haunting question. What do we do when life doesn't make sense? The good news? We're not alone in grappling with this question. Kafka's The Trial, Albert Camus' philosophy of absurdism, and Buddhist teachings all offer insights into how we can make peace with life's chaos, and even find meaning in it. Let's start with the ending of the trial. It's not a happy one, to say the least. Joseph K. is led to his death, executed like a dog. It's a moment that's both shocking and deeply unsettling. Why? Because it feels so pointless. There's no resolution, no justice, no answers, and yet that's exactly the point. Kafka is showing us the ultimate absurdity of life, how it can be unfair, unpredictable, and beyond our control. But here's the thing. While Joseph K's story is tragic, it doesn't have to be our story. Kafka paints a bleak picture, yes, but he also challenges us to ask, how would I respond in his shoes? Would I give in to despair, or would I find a way to rise above the absurdity? This is where Albert Camus comes in. Camus was a philosopher who believed life's lack of inherent meaning wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. He famously said, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." What he meant was that the act of living, of pushing forward despite the absurdity, is what gives life its meaning. Think about it. Life doesn't come with a manual. There's no step-by-step guide to happiness or success. And yet, we keep going. We laugh, we love, we create. That's the beauty of absurdism. It doesn't deny life's chaos. Instead, it says, so what? Let's make the best of it. Imagine if Joseph K. had adopted this mindset. Instead of obsessing over his trial, he could have focused on the parts of his life he could control: his work, his relationships, his passions. Sure, the trial would still be there, but it wouldn't define him. By embracing the absurdity, he could have found freedom. Now, let's bring in some Buddhist wisdom. Buddhism teaches us that suffering comes from clinging to control, to expectations, to the idea that life should go a certain way. Sound familiar? Joseph K. spends the entire novel clinging to the hope that he can make sense of his trial. But in doing so, he only deepens his suffering. Buddhism offers an alternative: acceptance. The Buddha taught that life is full of uncertainty, but peace comes from living in the present moment. When we let go of our need for answers, we open ourselves to the possibility of joy, even in the midst of chaos. Here's a practice that can help: mindfulness meditation. Imagine Joseph K. Instead of spiraling into anxiety, sitting quietly and focusing on his breath. It might not solve his problems, but it would give him a sense of clarity and calm. A chance to step back and see his situation for what it is, rather than what he fears it might be. Let's look at some real-life examples of people who found meaning in absurdity. One that stands out is Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl writes about how even in the horrors of a concentration camp, he discovered purpose. For Frankl, meaning came from small acts of kindness, from holding on to the hope that his suffering had a greater purpose. Another example? Think about Malala Yousafzai. After surviving an attack for standing up for girls' education, she didn't let the absurdity of her situation break her. Instead, she used it as fuel to fight for a better world. Her story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, we can choose to create light. One of Buddhism's core teachings is anicca, or impermanence. Everything in life, our struggles, our joys, even our identities, is temporary. When we truly understand this, we stop clinging to the idea that things need to be permanent or perfect. Instead, we learn to appreciate life for what it is, a constantly changing, beautiful mess. Imagine Joseph K. realizing that his trial, no matter how absurd, wouldn't last forever. That understanding alone could have given him a sense of relief. It's a lesson we can all take to heart. When life feels overwhelming, remember, this too shall pass. So, what do we do with all this? How do we take these lessons from Kafka, Camus, and Buddhism and apply them to our own lives? First, embrace the absurd. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair. Instead of fighting it, lean into it. Laugh at the chaos. Find joy in the struggle. As Camus said, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Second, let go of what you can't control. Buddhism teaches us that clinging only leads to suffering. Focus on what you can change, your actions, your mindset, your perspective, and let the rest unfold as it will. Third, look for meaning in the little things. Viktor Frankl found purpose in acts of kindness. Malala found it in fighting for justice. For you, it might be as simple as helping a friend, pursuing a passion, or savoring a quiet moment of peace. In the trial, Joseph K.'s story ends in tragedy. But our stories don't have to. Kafka, Camus, and Buddhism all remind us that even when life feels like a joke, we have the power to write our own punchline. So, the next time life throws you a curveball, remember this: the chaos doesn't define you. What defines you is how you respond to it. Will you let it consume you, or will you rise above it? Will you cling to the need for answers, or will you embrace the uncertainty and find joy in the journey? Life may not make sense, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. And who knows? Maybe the beauty is in the absurdity itself.